Hey friends, so here we are in our last week of the class. This week is designated as a writing week. It should be an active writing, rethinking, editing week for you all so that by the time you submit your final essays on Monday, you feel really confident about the work that you've produced because you've actually given yourself enough time to really conceptualize it and then execute writing it. So, on that note, I want to talk through in a little bit more detail my expectations for your final paper so that you are very clear on what your goals should be for this paper. So, firstly, your final papers are a little bit longer than your midterm papers. So, whereas your midterm papers were 3 to 5 pages, double spaced, your final papers are 5 to 7 pages, double spaced. So, that means 5 full pages, double spaced, 12-point font, Times New Roman, 5 full pages, um, all the way up to 7 pages. Do not go over 7 pages. If you can manage that, if you go over by like a paragraph, that's fine. But again, part of the writing process is really kind of distilling your ideas and editing yourself down so that your analysis can really kind of sing and not be weighed down by like a lot of extra text. You want to make sure that what you provide is cohesive and streamlined. So at least 5 full pages, no more than 7 pages, double spaced. And you also need a separate works cited page that should be on its own page to note the text that you are engaging in your paper. Okay. I'm going to ask you to review again the paper guidelines that are posted under the resources tab. Here is where you will find all the kind of like nitty gritty details for this paper in terms of formatting. Just briefly, your papers should, like I said, be double spaced, 12-point font, Times New Roman. They should have page numbers on the top right-hand corner. You should have a formal heading in your top left-hand corner. It should be your name. It should be my name. It should be the course as well as the date. Okay, this is standard MLA formatting procedure. So those are kind of the specifics of what your paper should have, how your paper should look. So make sure that you adhere to those specific guidelines. And then let's just talk sort of more broadly about, how to construct these essays. I have, given you some specific feedback on your midterm papers. You should utilize that. You should also have all of my feedback on your short writing assignments. You should utilize those notes. By now, you should have a sense of, what you are strong with in terms of composing papers and where you're a little bit weaker. So obviously, you want to cultivate where you're strong and really pay attention to those areas where you're weak so that you can make sure that you are overall sort of advancing the quality of your work. Let's just talk about sort of the process and the essentials for this particular paper. I like to think of like your final exam as kind of like your recital or your championship game. This is where you really get to put to work all of the skills that you've developed over the course of the semester. And all of you really have developed some really keen critical reading, critical writing, most importantly, critical thinking skills that you've honed in our discussion forums, that you've honed in your short writing assignments, in your midterm papers. So this is really a chance for you to showcase those new skills and really kind of shine at the end of the semester. Let's talk about your introductory paragraph. I'm going to talk through some of the important points that I want you to keep in mind as you're composing your works, and then I'm going to just kind of briefly review one of the sample midterm papers that I posted for you. That should be under the announcements some weeks ago, just to give you all a look at a completed essay by a fellow classmate to serve as a sort of guide of what this person is sort of doing well. So you have like a real tangible model to look at and refer to. So in your introductory paragraph, you should, and this should be a surprise to no one at this point, you should have the titles of the specific works that you're going to be including, and you should have the full author's names in your introduction. Okay, that is non-negotiable. You should not be referring to the authors right out of the gate simply by their last names. It's important to include the full name of the author, as well as the full names, full titles of whichever pieces you're going to be talking about, whatever titles of the stories you're going to be talking about, or poems, for example. You should have them fully stated in your introductions. After your introductions, after you've introduced the authors by their full names one time, then you can refer to the authors throughout by their last names. Also, remember to refer to them by their last names, not their first names. You know, you're not like bros with these authors. So, as a formality and a sign of respect, we refer to authors traditionally by their last names after we've introduced them at least once. Okay. Also, in your introductory paragraphs, you should have some mention of the particular time periods that these works were written in, and just any applicable social, historical, political, cultural information that we have discussed in that you've learned from lecture notes, from the readings that we've done, the introductory materials in your textbooks, anything that we've discussed in our discussion forums. This is sort of where you want to, bring to bear any critical information that may help sort of promote your analysis. An example of this, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more when I look at the sample midterm paper, but an example of this is to note that, for example, Leslie Marmon Silko is a contemporary Native American author. This is a culture that is sort of foundationally situated on oral storytelling and mythology, and the introduction of the Katsina spirit, which is a common figure, trickster figure in Native American culture, serves to contextualize to some extent this story of Yellow Woman. Whereas Yellow Woman engages sexually with this character, we as readership are not expected to necessarily condemn her for her adulterous actions because it is situated within this particular narrative, this particular Yellow Woman narrative, which is a story that is told and retold and passed down through the generations, which serves to sort of naturalize to some extent in this particular culture that experience. So you can be much more streamlined than that, but I'm trying to give you the full context of, sort of how I would process through utilizing some kind of, critical cultural information to shape your critical analysis of a given text. So that's just one example. So full authors' names, full titles, any applicable social, historical, political, cultural information that would enable you to analyze these texts more richly. And then, of course, you need an actual argument. And that is something that we are going to be working on, workshopping actively this week. Your thesis workshop forum is open. I'm asking you to post your introductory paragraphs and or just your thesis statements. Sometimes it's good to post your introductory paragraphs as well as your thesis statement because it can kind of provide some of that context to help set up your argument. And you may get more more productive feedback if somebody has the full context of what your introduction looks like. But we are going to be workshopping them this week to help you ensure that you have a sort of cohesive, clear, original argument at stake, that it's not just some sort of observation, but rather an actual argument where you're taking two texts, no more than three texts, and really putting them into some type of critical conversation with one another. Okay? let's just stop there. Let's look at the introductory paragraph from the sample midterm. You can all download this, print it out, use it as a guide for yourselves. But we have, right out of the gate, the authors of Lotus Fragrance and Yellow Woman showcase female sexual empowerment in their work. Pu Songling and Leslie Marmon Silko both endow their female characters the ability to express their sexuality in the hopes of restoring power back to female figures. Okay, so check. We have now the full titles of both of the stories that this particular person is going to be discussing. We get the full names, Pu Songling, Leslie Marmon Silko, of the authors, and we get a sort of introduction to how these two texts connect with one another, which is also really important. And then this person goes on to sort of situate each text by drawing from both the introductory notes from our text and also the lecture notes. So I'll just continue on. Songling wrote Lotus Fragrance along with other stories from his collection Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio in the hopes of creating, quote, formidable and powerful female characters, since women in his time period possess the power that many of his characters do. This is from the lecture notes. He did this by transforming his female characters into spirits, ghosts, and animals to render them more acceptable. Also context from the lecture notes. Likewise, and here's the connection between the two texts, Silko in Yellow Woman utilizes supernatural beings known as Katsina in the Native American culture, which serve to represent, quote, the forces that work to question or challenge established authority. And that is from our actual textbook, mythology textbook. So again, we're utilizing some context from the lecture notes, from our textbooks, in order to help sort of contextualize these two works and also draw a connection between them. Also really, really important. I'm going to jump down to the actual thesis statement because I don't want to talk through the entirety of the paper. But in terms of creating an actual argument, this person's thesis reads, in trying to bestow sexual power onto the female characters in their works, the sexuality of the female characters in Songling and Silko's work were demonized and controlled, suggesting that societies of these characters continue to have authority over their sexuality, making them the objects of sexual pleasure for their male lovers. So this is a little bit of a long thesis statement. You could easily split this up into 2 sentences, or you could separate them with a semicolon, for example. But you do get like how these two texts are connecting to one another and how they are how they connect to their societies at large in terms of the societies making them the objects of sexual pleasure and still aligning power with some kind of male authority figure in each text. Okay, so that's the type of a thesis that I would say is more critical in nature. It's drawing these two texts together. It's utilizing some social context in order to really crystallize the connection between the two texts. I should note too that you don't necessarily just have to figure out how texts connect to each other. You can also figure out the ways in which texts are diverging from one another. That could also be equally as important. You could do both too. Here's where they align and here's where they diverge, and this is why it matters in the context of my argument. Okay, so this is just a sort of specific example of what a solid functioning introductory paragraph should do in your final essays. You should also work in your body paragraphs to connect your text actively. What I mean by that is I don't want to see one paragraph about one story, another paragraph about another story. I would really like for you to try to work on establishing a clear introductory sentence which establishes the specific point that you want to make in that particular body paragraph, and then use both texts to further that argument. For example, in the midterm paper, Both Song Ling and Silko, this is body paragraph number 1, both Song Ling and Silko vested sexual power to their female characters in the form of sexual expression. Okay, we have a topic sentence. We clearly identify the ways in which these two texts connect with one another, right? Vested sexual power to their female characters in the form of sexual expression. Great, I have a sense of what this body paragraph is now going to be about. And then the student goes into more detail, drawing from the text in order to support and develop that point of view. So the authors depicted their female characters willingly engaging and enjoying their sexual experience with their lovers. Song Ling depicts the sexual expression of lotus fragrance in the following example. Quote, "The lamp was soon extinguished and the two of them climbed into bed where they enjoyed to the full the sweet pleasures of love." Okay, here, so here's what I'm going to be arguing. Here's a specific quote from the text in order to sort of demonstrate my point. It's really important to choose quotes selectively. Your quote should really do work for you. They should really showcase the idea, the point that you're trying to make. It's not useful to just, grab any random quote and put it in and think that your job is done. It is not. It should be a well-chosen quote that really fits in to the argument that you're trying to make at that specific moment. And then you should go on after you include a quote and sort of try to explain it and connect it back to your argument. You shouldn't just drop in a quote and move on to something else. So this particular student goes on. Here, Song Ling is depicting lotus fragrance as sexually liberated. Song Ling gives lotus fragrance the power to choose to engage in sexual activity as well as enjoy it. Okay, so here's a little description, a little connection back to the way in which this particular quote functions to support the argument that the student is making. I'm going to skip down now because here comes the connection to the second text. Likewise, Silko depicted the sexual encounter the woman had with Silva as pleasurable, as the woman found him physically and sexually appealing. "Come here," quote, "come here," he said gently. He touched my neck and I moved close to him to feel his breathing and to hear his heart. The woman was sexually attracted to Silva and she did not shy away from showing her sexual attraction to him. She describes later on, quote, "I touched his face and I had a feeling overcome me. I kissed him on the forehead and he reached out for me," end quote. Okay. Additionally, she did not feel guilty about committing adultery and leaving her child behind home to pursue her sexual adventure. So again, we get a connection to the second text. We get a quote from the second text. We get a description of how that quote functions in terms of the argument in this particular body paragraph that this student is making. So this is the type of active, critical, comparative work that I want to see in all of your body paragraphs. Okay, I'm not going to go through the entirety of the essay because you can read it yourselves. But I will just say, then there is a turn in the second body paragraph where she showcases the second part of her argument, which is that societies are still undermining the power of the females in terms of their sexual encounters, by demonizing their sexual desires. And so you get the topic sentence in the next body paragraph. Although both authors tried to give their female characters the power of sexual freedom, the sexuality of the characters were demonized and controlled by their respective societies. And there's a description. Sang's neighbors demonized fox and ghost spirits for being sexually devious. Quote, living all on your own like this, are you never scared of ghosts and fox spirits? Of which Sang replied, why should a grown man fear such things? Supposing something of that sort does ever come to me, if it's a female, I shall simply open my door and invite the young lady in. Now here's a description. The fox and ghosts were depicted as deceptive and conniving creatures by Sang's neighbors. However, Sang was not criticized for engaging in sexual relationships with the two female creatures, right? Okay, so again, we have topic sentence, connection to the societies at large, a quote, and then a description connecting the quote to the larger argument at stake in that particular body paragraph. And this person also then goes on later in the body paragraph to link to Silko's work as well and does the exact same thing. Here's the connection to Silko's work. Here's a quote. Here's a sort of commentary, my own sort of critical thinking on how this quote works in the context of the student's argument. And then she draws a connection at the end of the body paragraph between the two works. Sexual power of the female characters in Songling's and Silko's works were demonized by society and subjugated to male control, which just sort of ties up and crystallizes that specific argument. Okay. Your conclusion should be relatively brief. Like I've said before, your conclusion is a sort of echo of your intro. It should highlight the main ideas that you wanted to communicate in your entire essay. It should really highlight the argument that you were attempting to make and that you established ideally in your thesis statement. This particular conclusion reads, both authors tried to sexually empower the female characters in their work to challenge authority. Although the female characters in both Songling's and Silko's works were given sexual freedom, their sexual expression was demonized and controlled by their communities. Additionally, the female characters in both works were made to sexually submit to the male characters, resulting in their sexual objectification, while at the same time rendering control of their sexualities to the male characters. So that is a just nice sort of relatively brief summary of the main arguments that this particular student was attempting to make and the main connections that the student was trying to make between the two stories, between the two texts. So those are generally the goals of this final essay. I really do want you, even if you are uncomfortable posting your thesis statement, to the group at large, if you want to email it to me during the week, you can, to get some, pointed feedback on whether or not you're sort of in the right direction. Even better if you have an outline, a detailed outline for your essay. I can kind of give you a little bit of feedback on that as well. After Friday, I'm going to be a little less available. Saturday and Sunday, I'm actually having surgery on Saturday, so I won't be available Saturday or part of Sunday. I will start checking again later in the day on Sunday so that I can answer any last minute questions. But really, if you have questions or if you need immediate feedback or clarification from me on your papers, please make sure that you are in touch with me earlier in the week, certainly before Saturday, okay? If you have any other general questions about any aspect of your final papers, you can be in touch. Final essays are due on Monday, May 6th by 5 p.m. You should upload them as Word attachments if possible so that I can give you more constructive feedback on your actual papers. You should upload them underneath the assignments tab as always. And I think that's it. I have confidence in you all. I know it's a busy time, but ideally you'll utilize this week in order to really put together some stellar star papers. I'm counting on you. Okay, talk soon. Bye.